last, so please, if anyone is, I urge everybody to return to their seats. We've had great 4 days. Well, today is the fourth day. We did have great discussions. We had great panelists. We had great workshops. Intense, but fantastic. Lots of ideas, lots of recommendations, but we'll hear about them in the next few seconds. So, we are wrapping up, and I'd like to remind you that after this panel, there will be a performance, so I hope you do sit in and enjoy the performance before we break for lunch, and then you are all free, of course. But I think there's a 3 o'clock performance just next door, all right? 3 o'clock, if I'm not mistaken. Great. So, the moment, the reckoning moment. Okay, great. Excuse me. So, for the closing panel and remarks, which I will be moderating, I'd like to first welcome the Chairman, Department of Culture and Tourism, Mohammed Al Mubarak, to the floor. Okay, great. We know where we're seated. And there was a change. Marllo. Tim Marllo from the Royal Academy of Arts, Artistic Director. John Prideaux from The Economist, our US editor. Okay. And Alexandra from the Guggenheim Museum. Thank you for being here. And last but not least, Anna Paolini from the UNESCO, representative to the countries of the Gulf and Yemen. Please take your seats. So what a summit, I think, yeah? All right, so I think at the beginning, well, first, thank you. And I think I want to thank all the partners, definitely. And Ittihad, who was not here, but definitely supporting the summit. Thank you all. I know you've spent hours, long hours, panels, and workshops. And I saw the amount of engagement and the sort of the leadership throughout in terms of driving the discussion, pulling out ideas, and inspiring everybody here. So I do appreciate it. So just quickly, I think just perhaps the past few days, you've John, you've managed or moderated all the panels, particularly under the media stream. But nevertheless, you touched upon all the other sectors as well. But just some highlights. We've got a few minutes.
Some highlights for me from my own panels. We had some fantastic journalists, some of whom are doing very brave work. And the opportunity to talk about freedom of expression here is one we appreciate. Your Excellency, we talked about this backstage a little, but I don't think there's another country in this neighborhood where we'd be able to sit around on a stage like this with members of the government and talk about freedom of expression. It's been great to talk with some of the museum folks. I previously thought of journalism and museum curation as quite separate activities, and now I realize they're not. So that's
what have you learned there?
Well, just in terms of thinking about the audience, how you keep them interested, how you find the right balance between getting people to pay attention to you and being more didactic. So that's been fascinating. I just wanted to say something I'm talking rather a lot, but just something very briefly about freedom of expression, Tim, the last panel. I feel like as a journalist I have to stand up for the idea that this is a kind of universal value, and I do think that. But I'd also say from Britain and America, the countries that I know best, this is not something that happened overnight. It was a very, very long process and a contested process, and there's no end point. In both countries, it's possible to move back. I do think that that's the goal, and I think it's a great thing that the UAE is much closer on the spectrum towards freedom than many other countries in the region. But I'd also say just one closing observation on that freedom of expression in my country, in Britain, didn't come about in the abstract. It wasn't that people ran around saying, we want freedom of expression. It actually came out of tolerance, and religious tolerance in particular. People wanted the freedom to kind of worship in the way they chose to worship themselves. So the fact that this is the year of tolerance seems like a good thing.
Yeah, thank you.
Worked out pretty well for the founding of America too.
And yet in both of our countries, bastions of liberalism, particularly universities, are places of fundamental intolerance in places. There's non-platforming and so on, which was exactly my point about universalism. So I take your point, that discussion's ended, but we really aren't the custodians of moral authority in the West.
I agree.
Could you please expound on that point?
No. Sorry.
No,
because I think otherwise it hijacks the debate. No, it's just the fact that particularly in university campuses, people are offended at the drop of a hat, and the idea that you have a belief in something that is so weak that someone who puts the alternative view, however offensive, that you don't feel rigorous enough to stand up to it, to articulate your disagreement, or to boycott it. In other words, to say, I'm not going to listen to this person. But the idea that you have that person non-platform, that they have no right to speak in these institutions, I think is fundamentally antipathetic to the idea of freedom of speech. But, that is another discussion, I think.
Yes, indeed. Fantastic.
Freedom of speech and also freedom of inquiry.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, listening, says a man who's still talking, is really critical in this whole summit.
Yes.
And I think it was really nuanced, articulated in a very nuanced way that's as important as allowing people their voice, their expression. Is actually to think about how we mediate that, judge, understand, which also cross-pollinates with journalism. I mean, there's a lot of unmitigated rubbish, false news out there, fake news out there, and actually we can defend the right of people to say what they want, but actually it's how we judge, make sense, and articulate that.
And perhaps we could take the role of the museums here in terms of allowing ideas to flourish, encouraging new ideas, fighting orthodoxy in terms of structures of museums or how things are displayed. Again, highlights and...
Well, first, I just really want to express my profound gratitude to the organizers for hosting all of us, to my fellow speakers, to the panelists, to the participants, and those who joined our rather rigorous workshops. I have learned so much, and as Mohammed just said to me, it's really all about connectivity. It's about the inspiration of listening, but not just listening, of actively listening and changing your kind of position in the world. I mean, I kind of felt like I was on a globe that was constantly spinning, and my own positionality in that globe was constantly being reformulated. And I think that fluidity of thinking is what I have taken away from this. And what I've taken away from it is also any problem in the world can be solved by a lot of brilliant, passionate, expert minds from a variety of spaces, and not only geographic spaces, but professional spaces. So we spoke yesterday in our kind of pre-preparation summary meeting that to acknowledge, and I think the summit is coming out of this too, that we really are at a historical, critical point of shift that might be as consequential as the end of the World War II or the turn of the century and the collapse of empires and the rise of new ones in the early 20th century. There are these other critical moments of tremendous radical social as well as political, cultural revolution, and we are at one of those. Technology is a force. The rise of China is a force. I would say the rise of the power of this region is also a force. It's a moment of recalibration. Some people are very terrified by that. There's been a lot of destruction that we've been hearing about that have risen from certain ideological passions. They've also risen from drastic climate change that we did not address enough in this summit. I hope we can address it in the next one. Massive migration. These are all catastrophic, but also potentially transformative forces that history is bringing to us. We've shaped that history, but we've also been, we're agents of that history, but we're also receivers of that history, let's say. And I feel like people in this room, we can solve those questions. We can be at the forefront or use this summit in the future, use our museums in the future, use our journalism, use our art spaces, use our radicalism in UNESCO heritage projects to address these issues and maybe come up with a new, not a politically generated United Nations to address the problems that faced the end of the World War II, but maybe what we were talking about in the panel before, a social contract. I'm in.
Fascinating. Yep. Mohammed, highlights, please. You've seen the partners, of course, taking leadership in terms of driving the discussion, but also inspiring all the participants here to work together, come up with ideas. So how do you see this? I just highlight, and then, yeah, just your thoughts. Are we making a difference together through the summit?
First and foremost, I want to thank everybody here, not just in the panel, but everybody who's come to the summit. They have played a role in inspiring me, inspiring the Department of Culture, inspiring change. So thank you all. I think when we started the summit, first of all, you all came here the first day and you brought the rain. In our culture, bringing the rain is a celebration. So Abu Dhabi celebrated you all being here. And it celebrated you for what I believe a specific reason, is unifying our goals. We're all here together today to decide a future that will unify us in safeguarding heritage and culture and enhancing culture and heritage. That's the whole point of this. And I think when we came here, we all decided that we don't want to come with any barriers. We broke every single barrier. We said we're going to listen to each other, we're going to listen to our ideas, we're going to take and give, we're not going to scrutinize, and even if we did, it's going to be in a smart way. And we're all going to walk out together hand in hand with this possible unification of the strategy. And that's something extremely special, and that's the hope for the Cultural Summit. The hope that when we walk out of these doors and we leave Abu Dhabi, the idea is that our thoughts stay with us, and everything we've learned from each other stay with us, and we do something about it. You know, I sat down and I've heard some fantastic discussions in these panels. I've heard people saying, I'm not afraid to take this initiative, how big it is. Because I'm not worrying about myself, I'm worrying about the future. I'm worrying about my children, I'm worrying about their children, and that's what we're here to do. I'm not saying the last generation is lost or our generation is lost, it's not. But our generation is poised to make a difference for the future, to make it a much better and much more acceptable aspect of what we want to do. We all go back home and we say, oh, don't I wish this happens? I think we need to start moving from wishing and start doing something about it.
Yeah.
So my inspiration comes from everything. I'm inspired from basically walking down the street, but being here has really inspired me to really go back and sit down and talk to and network with all the people I've met here to really focus on some of the issues that we discussed in the workshops, some of the issues we discussed and some of the questions that came along, and how we can take that to a real solution. You know, while everybody's here, to many people, they've come to the UAE for the first time, and they've come to Abu Dhabi for the first time. And I'm sure before coming here, there has been a sort of idea of what this, or a misconception of what this region is all about, or what Abu Dhabi is all about. And I'm sure you've learned something quite different. I just want to tell everybody a little story that, just like I said, you've all inspired me. The main reason I'm in this role, and the main reason I'm here, and one of the main reasons I've created, with the help of everybody here, this cultural summit, is this person who's on my throat. Maybe many of you don't know this person. This is the father of the UAE. He is my father, he's Mohammed's father, he's the father of many people here. Before creating the United Arab Emirates, before him sitting in a panel similar to this, bringing his partners and his brothers together and saying, let's make a nation, he created a museum in Al Ain. And that museum told the history of the UAE and the history of the region. And he wanted to focus on the history of the region. He wanted to show people how we were connected in our past, in our present, and of course in our future. And that connection was on all aspects of culture, whether it was music, whether it was the arts, whether it was religion, whether it was societies. So yes, we are in the year of tolerance, but tolerance has been a part of our DNA for thousands of years. And it's it's something right now that we cherish and we celebrate. And we want to do everything in our power to even make it bigger than what it was. So I want to thank him for inspiring us to create a cultural summit. And I want to thank all of you. And I really want to hear more about what we can do to take this forward.
Thank you very much, Mohammed. Yeah, fantastic. Maybe just a little bit more, and that could take us to UNESCO. The world, there's a lot of division out there. You know, Brexit has been delayed, a few more months.
It's been fun.
But we've got here a summit that has invited people from about 90 countries, so 90 nationalities, probably 90 national perspectives. That's a lot of perspectives.
Correct.
So this panel, the summit, brought the world together. What are you hoping
It is.
from this almost sense of unity or consensus?
I mean, I'll give you a story. So obviously we've been here and we've been discussing and we've heard the situation that happened in Brazil. We've heard from the director and what he's doing about it and what he wants to do about it. But the first thing that comes to mind is we've already had sit-downs to basically say how we can help. How we in Abuظbي can help, whether it is monetary help, whether it is help in the curation of whatever they're trying to do, whether it is help from a technical perspective. We're here to do something about it. And I'm sure by the time he goes back to Brazil, he is going to have something in his hand that will basically say, okay, I've met somebody in Abuظbي that I didn't think I was going to meet. We've discussed, and we have a solution for a problem I have in Brazil. That's the whole point of the Cultural Summit. What I've loved to see here is that we have moved so far from it to say that it's my problem and I'm going to fix it, versus it's our problem, we should all be here to fix it.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you. Yeah. So perhaps, okay. Indeed.
By the way,
Yes.
I'm not paying these guys to clap. So.
Thank you for
So I
the
appreciate it.
disclaimer. Yes, thank you. So again, you've got all these voices,
Absolutely.
In the summit. And we've got, of course, UNESCO as a partner and as this institution that is sort of carrying a lot of the burden, the pains in the world, being there when there's a crisis, responding. We are all here agents of culture. Today we spoke about stakeholders and other stakeholders beyond the realm of culture, other actors. Sort of the role of UNESCO and, the time you spent here the past few days, some of the highlights in perhaps touching on bringing the larger community together.
Yes, absolutely. First of all, thank you very much for the opportunity of being here and for partnering with you on so many activities, a privilege for us. And since you were mentioning also the father of the nation and his vision, and I think that his legacy is exactly the new generation of leaders that made also this, forum possible for so many of us to bring our intellectual contribution, so many artists, so many people from the media, from critical thinkers, bloggers, youth, and so on, to make this creative. How can we capture all of that? I think this is a challenge, but it's also an opportunity. I think we heard a lot of inputs and also what came out of the audience of how to move from here forward. I think one thing we heard very strongly was the voice of youth. Youth participation. I think that would be one thing to give voice to the youth, maybe to the next forum, to listen to them on different age groups and so on, from different parts of the world, on how they perceive culture and what culture doesn't mean for them in their lives. For what we did here during the forum, we look at one aspect of culture. Of course, we saw the multi-dimension of culture throughout these 4 days with so many people interacting and creative networks that we hope will flourish in future. We look at one aspect in particular, that was the one of cultural heritage and how and what we can do for heritage in this time at risk. You have mentioned it's not only armed conflict, you have mentioned climate change. We see more and more this natural disaster impacting countries, already very poor countries, and cultural heritage is impacted as well. So how much this is relevant? We hope that during the panel we were able to address you know, the why this is relevant,
Yes.
and why, for example, in certain situation, culture has to be part of their agenda for the reconstructions of countries, and also to build resilience. I think it's important that we look at culture not only because of their value as a monument, but also the value that they bring to people and what people perceive through the culture. So to look more at the human dimension of culture, not only because of their impact, economic impact into their livelihood, for example, through restoration and involvement of youth in conservation and so on, but because also in this region we have seen that crises are not hit and run, they are protracted. If you look at Iraq, we are going to 30 years crisis. If you look at in Syria, it's 6. If you look in the Yemen, it's 4. So you see, it's a long crisis. So it's not anymore an emergency, it's a status quo. So I think that through the conservation of culture in all its aspects, we build resilience of people. We give them hope. That's what they want to see. They don't want to be seen only as in crisis in that moment. They want to live normal lives. And this is important that also we in society that is not affected by this crisis, we learn about the importance of culture through our education systems. I think this is fundamental on how this can instill in a new generation. We are talking about building new generation that has a different opening to the world, that through culture they learn about differences, they accept each other, they instill tolerance. Another thing that were said before in the panel is the word humility, to have a little bit more of humility in listening to the other and listening. I think this came out a lot from our discussion.
Yes, thank you. Hope, humanity, the value of the human, the individual, as I hear here, humility. And that takes me to a word I've been hearing a lot, is empathy. Mm-hmm. So empathy, I know we talk about technology, how we can, help and disseminate culture, art, but empathy is required, that sort of face-to-face interaction. A quick, perhaps, look at empathy within the media context, art and museum.
Well, the best journalists are good at empathy. I think it's a work in progress for all of us, perhaps. We have a lot of biases that we have to get past in order to be empathetic, but we try. It's an important value. I think it's, at its best, culture is about empathy, isn't it? I mean, and it helps us to get beyond our nature as individuals and deal with this sense of sort of insignificance that we all feel from time to time about our place in the world, our role in the world, our place in the kind of broad sweep of human history, and our sort of ultimate kind of insignificance of our fleeting moment on this planet. We were talking a bit earlier today about what culture is, and I don't have a good answer for that, except for yesterday when I was at the Louvre for my first visit. I was looking at a double-headed sculpture that was found in Jordan 8,500 years ago. And I was standing next to Tim at the time, who's somebody I'd just met. And he said, I bet Giacometti saw this. And I knew exactly what he meant.
You could explain, perhaps.
Well, so, Giacometti, when he was living in Paris in the 1920s, saw a lot of very early art and, kind of cultural artifacts in the museum in Paris. And he incorporated them into his work and made something entirely new. And I think that's what culture is. It connects us to each other. It connects us to this broad sweep of human history. And at its best, it shows what, kind of mankind can do in its best moments, which is a nice break from the stuff that most journalists spend their time looking at, which tends to be us at our worst.
Yes, fantastic. Yeah.
So the moral of that story is you need to go to the Louvre, Abu Dhabi.
Yes, you must, definitely.
Go watch Ain Ghazal. She is beautiful.
Tim, please, on empathy.
Is a lack of empathy one of the definitions of borderline psychosis? So I think we would all salute the idea of empathy and ask for more of it in the world. But I also think that empathy doesn't preclude disagreement. And I don't think any of us are coming to a meaningless liberal consensus, and liberalism is something I'll fight for to my death. But I do think that the articulation of difference through listening and empathy, but also the proclamation of one's ideas, is important here. And I think that the idea that institutions lack empathy is an interesting point, but also something else that's emerged is that institutions can't and shouldn't aspire to be all things to all people. And sometimes when we have conversations institutionally between ourselves and with others, we subscribe to very admirable ideas empathetically, that in the end, the ultimate extension of those ideas would be that we lose all identity in our quest to be everything to everyone. And I think that again, I keep using the word nuance, but the nuanced discussion around specialism and expertise, but listening to broader opinions and listening to other opinions, that's the balance that cultural institutions should aspire to. And it's actually often that which artists do, consciously and subconsciously. So I think the idea, without romanticizing artists as a breed apart, that we might think in the future of ways of giving artists different kinds of voices in a summit. They've taken part in panel discussions, but I'd like to see some one-to-one interviews with artists. I think they've got very interesting perspectives and see things differently as well as similarly. I mean, I love Michael Craig Martin's remark in a workshop yesterday that art should be a rescue station for every disparate idea in the world. I think that's a lovely idea, profound and otherwise. And so that would be my tangential view of empathy.
Yeah, fantastic. Alexandra.
I like the word empathy as a kind of program. And in my work and in the workshops that we conducted, there were some very concrete ideas that came out. As I mentioned to Rita earlier, I feel like we are being called to action, but it's a call to action to oneself. It's a call to action to each other, and then it's a call to action to the world. I think we have to start with ourselves. A couple of concrete ideas came out, which I think can manifest this call to action. One was, of course, I've mentioned earlier, Emeka Ogbo's and others call to make some kind of very innovative technological platform to house temporarily and in a highly creative, innovative way, objects that should be destined for reparation or might be destined for reparation. What that looks like, how that operates, is something that we can prototype and workshop. Hopefully we can partner with you to actually enact that and deliver at least this artist's dream for his passion. And I think it's a passion that's shared by many for different reasons from different perspectives. But that also brings me to empathy in. So what is that? That's a total act of empathy. That's Emeka having an act of empathy for his countrymen and for the people and children who are growing up in Africa who do not have access to objects that might be stored out of reach, out of financial reach, economic reach, but literally out of physical reach because they're in storage in museums in far-off places. But there's another act of empathy in that, which is the kind of imagination that we can bring to the activation of that object. It's not simply a database. It is a range of interpretations, active, evolving interpretations of that object, including performance, including an 8-year-old's idea of what that might inspire, an artist like Giacometti saying, oh, I want to make a new whole work of art or style of art or revolution of art based in the ideas that I see that might not be based on any specific knowledge at all about that object, but whose form and spirit totally, inspire me madly. Another idea that came out for us that I would love to integrate into the work we're doing in museums is an app. People said that's such a boring idea, it's been done. I'd like to do it differently. Take a nap, look at, to walk around the museum and get multiple voices. Get multiple voices from about the interpretation of that object, not just the curator's voice, not just the educator's voice, but really let the viewer make their own interpretation based on a variety of input. And just about the word culture. Yesterday at our workshop, we posed the question, how might we imagine new ways to encounter culture? So Suhanya, Richard, and I came up with that language. And we were immediately knocked down. Don't use the word culture. It's too monolithic. let's evolve our idea of culture to how might we imagine new ways to encounter creativity and stories. So I learned from that. Maybe culture is too monolithic a term. By the way, it's a very Latinate word. It is tied to the ground, to territory, to terroir. It is literally to cultivate, as in cultivate the land for not a Bedouin society, a grounded society that is built on agriculture. That is the origin
Very specific there.
of the word. In China, the word for culture is not a word, it's two characters. The first character is word, and the second one is to activate, how to activate the word. Not the word as in the word of God, but in literature, actually in poetry.
Language.
Bunka or wenhua, and this is the concept of culture in China, Japan, Korea, and Vietnam for millennia, and so that means there are different ways of looking at culture or thinking or acting culture. So we also maybe want to break down and come up with a new idea of what culture is. I like this idea of creativity and stories because it's very empathetic.
Empathetic. Thank you for that. I came across an interesting definition for culture. It is the result of civilization. So obviously stemming from language or the word or
in East Asia, civilization is the light of the word. But again, not the word is God.
Yeah.
The light of the written, of what man, what humane, what an elevated mind. A mind in the East Asian practice that practices the brush arts, which are poetry, painting, calligraphy, and then they add two other things, an instrument and the game of Go.
Okay, fantastic.
These are the pursuits of the cultivated mind,
Yes,
of the enlightened mind.
Cultivated minds, absolutely. Mohammed, I think we can, what you spoke, some of the ideas that have come out of the workshops, but going to the workshops, we had 3 days, long, intense. Everybody took part, I think many of us here. And I think you sat with the partners, you got a few thoughts, ideas, your impression perhaps of how the workshops ran?
I mean, the workshop was fantastic, and I think everybody.
And sort of your expectations.
Yes, it basically hit all my expectations, and they continue to. I mean, in this forum, we heard that we want to focus on the youth, and that's something I think we definitely need to hear. We've heard it from many people here that the voice of the youth really will define the future here. So I think for next year's cultural summit, there should be a forum dedicated to the voices of youth and the voices of the youth generation on how they want to perceive culture, how they want to look at culture, how they want, I mean, we've heard here on how technology can be utilized to either safeguard intangible heritage or safeguard or allow pieces to be seen all over the world. Where this is something I think is important, but we need to hear it from them. What do they really want to see, and how do they want to see it, and how they want to interact with it. One of the other things I heard during the workshop is creating some sort of virtual museum, where maybe in some countries where the infrastructure is not there, or the view of investing heavily in a massive capex project and creating this museum of artifacts is maybe not there today. How can we help in bringing not only their culture, but even world culture to these locations using technology? And that's something that's just really interesting for me. I think we can work with entities like Google and et cetera on how we can make that happen. People like Team Lab and how we can make that happen that we've met in this summit. And that is something that's the outcomes of the workshops.
Great, fantastic. Well then, from UNESCO's perspective, yes.
I want to pick up
some of the ideas you've come up with, looked into, exploring at this stage.
Sure, I want to follow up on the issue of technologies and the use of technology. There's been a lot of discussion. Yesterday we had a full panel on this issue, how technology can help in several situations. I mean, to bring culture to communities that do not have access to culture, because as you mentioned, there are particular situations, not simply because all the objects are in storage, or they are in other countries and so on. So how we can really reach out to people, with culture. In our case, it was discussed a lot on the use of culture for documentation and inventory of cultural heritage. So, and this has to deal a lot with prevention. It's not only reacting when we are in a moment of crisis, but it's actually how the international community can really come together and think that prevention is, I wouldn't say the solution, but it's helping mitigating a lot damages to cultural heritage. And we also know that certain areas of the world are more prone to natural disasters. I mean, we know it. Yes. We have mapping of that, or some areas are more prone also to man-made disasters. So how we can help these countries to be and to have the tools to prevent and mitigate damages to cultural heritage. So documentation, inventory, using new technologies, using artificial intelligence. I mean, you can use artificial intelligence, for example, to teach the machine on how to detect when you have a crisis and you have a lot of tweets going on and a lot of Facebook and so on, to detect where that particular heritage is and compare it maybe with old pictures of that heritage that has been stored in some archive, for example. So there are a lot of things that we can do, and a lot of imagination that can be brought, and a lot of thinking to this issue. So prevention is really important for us. And this came out really loud out of our
definitely
discussion.
This technology as sort of helping us out here.
Has helped tremendously, especially in terms of
taking
reducing
our jobs
timing.
Then if it's in AI.
Reducing timing, and be accurate as well, and be accurate. And but this doesn't mean that
and accountability as well here.
Yeah, but you always need a human eyes, because of course,
fantastic.
I mean, to manage and to make sure that what you're doing is exactly the right thing.
John, as well, ideas. From them.
We had a lot of ideas in our sessions. They came mostly out of having such a mixture of people from all over the world.
Yes.
And because we had such a big mixture, often people were dealing with very different situations. So there's a journalist from Zimbabwe who's complaining that whenever anything controversial happens in that country, the government just unplugs the whole internet. So that was obviously quite different from, journalists operating in America who were worried about problems of information overload, and it's the direct opposite. But one of the things that has struck with me, because we've had a discussion in our panels throughout the week about the good and the bad of technology as it relates to media. We had one person in our workshops from West Africa, and she told me that in parts of West Africa, when you die, your friends get together and they get to design your coffin. And often what they'll do is design the coffin in the shape of the thing that you've paid the most attention to or been really into. So she told the story of somebody who died, and this is a real phone addict, was buried in a coffin in the shape of a mobile phone. And listening to that just made me think, I really do not want to be buried in an iPhone-shaped coffin in however many years' time. And it was a wonderful reminder to sort of lift my eyes from the screen, pay more attention to the kind of real, tangible world around me. So that's something that I'm gonna take away from this.
Yeah, fantastic.
How would you like to be buried?
In an
Can I get back to you on that? Yeah. I mean, I suppose the thing is, it's there's a mantra. There's this whole movement in Silicon Valley now, sort of against technological saturation. And one of the mantras of that is, we are what we choose to pay attention to. And so if you judge me by what I choose to pay attention to, I'd probably be buried in something sort of shaped like Donald Trump, which would be terrible. What would I like to be? That would be something quite different. It would be more like some of the things that I saw going around the Louvre last night. So it's a reminder to vary the diet. And pay attention to the real world.
Three days you didn't mention Trump today. You've now got buried by him. It's terrible.
Trump Tourette's. I'm sorry.
Fantastic. Thank you. So Tim, on outcomes and
I think one of the issues that keeps raising itself with institutions is funding, and it's a different kind of issue, but there's a big overlap with artists. And I think that one of the action points about an imaginative, pluralistic funding scheme for institutions and talent. To reiterate my point earlier, it can't be for everyone and all things, but the idea of looking at networks of funding. There was a term, rhizomatic, that came up in one of the workshops, and it's been picked up in various points and in various panels. And I think it's a very interesting idea that instead of everything being top down, and obviously funding has that implication and it's generous and important, but the idea that from roots things emerge and things can be funded along those lines. I mean, it needs work on it, but I think that's important. And I think another action point is, I mean, I think it's a fundamentally important and generous thing to bring everyone to one place. And I think we learn and share and encounter. But I think the idea that certain people coming here have expressed the idea that to have something, not a 3-day summit, but to have an event or a discussion or a talk or something that... So a network of events that may happen as a consequence of this in different parts of the planet around subjects that particular area or people in that area have asked for, I think is worth considering.
Yes, thank you. And any other ideas, recommendations that you might have come across?
I think that what you said is extremely important, that, you know, we sort of having this discussion going on in different cultural setting and being even more inclusive than now, so to try to reach more audiences in different countries, but also of different age, so to listen to them and to maybe build, you know, the next summit based upon their reaction to certain topics and so on. And it might be controversial, might be different than what we are thinking. I think we all look at culture through our own cultural lens, because we are shaped by our cultural experience, say who we encountered, what we read, what we study, and so on. So I think this will help us also to have this empathy and toward the others. I think it would be a very good addition to the next continuation of the summit.
Through these. Thank you. I mean, so just seems like a digital documentation approach, database, and it's reacting, but also a preventing kind of approach. And of course, that's using technology here, and that sort of goes back to our theme, cultural responsibility and new technology. A VR museum, particularly, especially for countries that need such museums, and but help also sort of access collections and ideas from different parts of the world, and finding new funding platforms for talent, for youth, and setting up some kind of network of events in the next perhaps evolution of the summit, and being a bit more inclusive. I've got enough 90 countries here today,
no, you have
but maybe by being a bit more innovative, how to engage and get more out of them. Great. I'll leave that.
One last thing, if you don't mind. Can I call the team who's helped make this happen? Rita, Ali, Reem? Because I think they need a... Where are they? Let's go. They're getting pretty. Hold on. Okay. That's the team right here. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Congratulations.
Fantastic job.
Congratulations. Congratulations.
Fantastic. Of course.
Congratulations.
Well done.
Pleasure. Well, no, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Please stand.
Shukran.
This little girl.
Oh, there she went.
Yes, of course, for listening through all this. Will it make a difference? Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you.
I mean,
that's the voice of youth, by the way.
Absolutely.
This is the youngest person.
If she's listening, we're doing our job.
Yeah. The youngest person. Does this work? So, what's your name?
Amna,
Why are you here?
so I can watch Daddy talking.
Are you having a good time?
Yeah.
Yes, you enjoying this place?
Yes.
Are you inspired meeting all these people?
No.
Well, we're here to make a difference. Thank you.
Out of the mouths of children.
Yeah, we are.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Really pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Great. any final words? I mean, this is the conclusion. We still have a performance and then a goodbye. But I guess from our partners here, The Economist, UNESCO, Department of Culture and Tourism, the Guggenheim, and Royal Academy of Arts, and we've got Ittihad as well. But I've seen sort of magic happen. Yes, it's been stressful, it's been long hours, but we've definitely, for me, I feel extremely humbled by this experience, seeing this kind of collegial effort coming together, the sense of wanting to make a difference and inspiring everybody else here. And as well for all the guests that have left their homes and families just to spend this week here in Abu Dhabi. Thank you all. And of course, thanks to all the support behind the scenes for this event. Please, a round of applause to everybody, really. I learned so much from your leadership here. Last words, please.
Last word?
Please.
Well, since we began this summit with an invitation to imagine that was led by the artist Marcus Luchens, perhaps we can close with something that he said to our workshop yesterday, which is create expectation violations.
Expectation violation.
We were also
Tim.
told that sleep could be a form of radical occupation, and I think a lot of us are going to do some radical occupying at the end of this conference.
Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Anything? Muhammad.
Thank you. Thank you,
Sure.
everybody. Just thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you again.
Thank you.